Good evening.
Good evening.
How are you?
I'm pretty good. How are you?
I'm excited to be here. Let me turn my volume up. Make sure it's all the way up. I know y'all can't hardly hear me. I don't make much racket.
I was also thinking of the irony, I guess, of our topic of discussion tonight after what happened today.
I know. What last count I saw was 2 and 17.
That's what I saw too, and some things about the perpetrator.
I didn't see. I meant to Google it and read it before last tonight, but I didn't.
He was 23 years old. His mother had worked at the school until a few years ago.
Sounds kind of like the one from um uh, oh,
Sandy Hook.
Sandy Hook. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Let's see. Okay. Two children,
He had
17
posted
people.
something on YouTube that he had set it up to I guess go not live, but it was he had it timed where I
Yeah,
guess you could access it when he was starting his activity. But the feds took it down. That said there were some really disturbing things on there. It
I
said they're
bet.
treating it as a Catholic hate crime, but
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know.
Mm,
I think he had some things that he has struggled with. Um, but he was only 23 years old, and he ended up shooting himself in the back of the church, it said.
mm, mm. Wow. Just guessing another one of these incel young fellows that get caught up in the internet and all that narrative on the internet, develop this hate.
Well, I
Mm.
also read at one point his mom had worked. I don't know if she was successful, but she was wanting to get a name change for him because uh he viewed himself as a female. So I don't know, like if there could have been something from that. I mean, there's no telling what all was going on. I mean, he was
No.
obviously had a lot of issues.
Yeah. 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 Well, you know, when there was a time when we didn't have to think about any of this stuff. But now it's the first thing we have to cover. And
I know
unfortunately that
it's
keeps getting brought back up. I mean, how many semesters have we done this that we didn't have a school shooting of some sort?
exactly.
Not many.
And I remember, I don't know how many years ago this was, but we had a guy from, from New Hanover County. And I remember he emailed us because he was went in New Hanover High School where they had the shooting and he was there and he emailed us to thank us
Yeah.
because he said that 603, not that you're ever fully prepared for something like that, but he said that he felt like he was much more prepared to deal with that situation because of going through our class.
Yeah. Well, I had one at Albemarle High School. Um, and he was in 605. He was my intern. He was in 605, but I'd had him in 603. Gary, and I had visited him there at the school, and he was on morning supervision when the kid walked up and shot the kid right next to him and killed him. and handed him the gun. Um, and Gary decided then that he didn't want to be a school administrator anymore.
I can understand.
Yeah.
When I was at Coolwood, we had a mom that came barreling on in her vehicle onto the bus lot. It was during drop off, and she didn't have a gun, but she had a knife, and she was going out after two of our students
Yeah.
for, mess at home.
Yeah. Well, Monday of this week, on the opening day of school in Charlotte, they arrested two parents at Palisades.
Yeah, they shot through a window at the school last week. It was before school had started, but
Yeah.
I think it had something to do with football.
I don't know, but the woman had a gun and a box cutter, and the man just had a box cutter, I think. But I don't know
Oh,
what.
okay. I hadn't heard about that, but I know that they had somebody shot through one of the classroom windows.
And in response to that, they had two parents to show up on the first day of school, and I don't know how they knew or what they did, but they arrested both of them, and the woman had a gun and a box cutter, and the man had a box cutter. But the funny thing was, I know that Palisades is down on 49 just before you get to the Buster Boyd Bridge down in that
Hmm.
community, but the parents had a Rock Hill address. They said they were parents.
Well, you remember this was back in 94 when the kid's gun went off in the classroom at Almar Road.
Hmm.
I mean, like he was across the hall from me, and I walked out of my classroom, and he walked out of the classroom, and he had it in his hand, and it didn't even register in my brain because, like you said, there used to be a time we never thought about stuff like this. It did not register right away to me that he was standing there holding that gun.
Yeah. Well, of course, we had the kid killed at Butler.
Yes, I do remember that because my
Um,
son knew him.
and then, but the one that was, we had the one where the kid brought the gun to Northwest School of the Arts and shot it into the floor.
Hmm.
Um, you know, um, I mean, it's always something. I mean, it's not like, you could say, well, this happened just like when I was high school principal and Columbine happened. You think, well, that's out in Colorado. But then, we've had a shooting, we had one killed at Butler. We have a shooting. Somebody either shoots or fires or, you know, every year in Charlotte. And then we have all these others. I mean, it's something, and other issues that you have to be prepared for all the time. I see our time is, we got some folks with us tonight. We'll go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining us tonight.
And
Um,
Courtney's driving, right? So I hope
yeah,
she's being really safe.
yeah, and she needs to be safe and be paying attention to the road. Don't run over anybody. All right. So our star of the week, we always start with the star of the week. Our star of the week, uh, and you'll have to help me make sure I pronounce your name correctly, Raquel.
Yes, sir.
All right, there's your star of the week right there. He wrote a great OMA Task 1. It was very thoughtful and very thorough. And when I say thoughtful, he understood what we were asking in terms of how much input does the faculty have in designing the budget for a school? And how does that relate to, we sit and go through this great ordeal to develop a school improvement plan. Every fall, you have to turn yours in as a school principal. That's a legal requirement. And I'm going to show you that in a few minutes. But how many schools do you know that just put that up on a shelf somewhere and never go back to it, or they don't fund it? How do you expect it to happen if you don't fund it? And he drawed that connection into his OMA. It was very thorough. He had all the pieces, but he drew that connection most specifically, which is very intentional and very smart. That's what we're trying to do is get you to see that if we're going to have buy-in from the faculty on this plan every year, they've got to have a seat at the table when we talk about how the money is spent. That's part of transformational leadership is that collaboration, that communication, that buy-in that you have to have. Again, we're not worried about the accounting of the money on the back end. We're worried about how we decided to spend the money on the front end and who gets to be part of that. He also did a great job on his DB1, discussion board one. And he talked about, and this is always the one we were just talking about. I was high school principal during Columbine. Yes, I'm that old. That was what, 35 years ago or whatever it was. Yes, I'm that old. Um, and it doesn't do any good to have these plans if you don't communicate them and everybody doesn't know about them and they're not updated and the class rosters aren't up to date and those kinds of things. We were just referencing the shooting in Minneapolis today. The last big shooting in Charlotte at Butler High School where a kid was killed, and Dr. Maraglia's son knew him because he was a student there at the time. They had all these plans but they hadn't communicated, and it just turned into a disaster to the point where the superintendent ended up getting relieved of his duties and some other people along the way. um, Now, when I was in the central office in Charlotte, I had problems with Butler. We'll get into that later on when we get around to the disciplinary data reporting. I always had problem with them out there in that they're so far away from everybody else, I guess, in the district. They feel like they're kind of on their own or do whatever they want to do until something goes bad. And then people end up having to go home. And so what happened there, we talked about our crisis plans. You need 3 evacuation plans. And you need to be able to clearly communicate whether we're doing plan A, plan B, or plan C. Plan A is always evacuate on your campus. Now, we did that for months regularly after the Columbine shooting because somebody call in a bomb threat or a shooter every day. And
Mhm.
you got to have a place where you can just get them out of the building, check your building, and get them right back in. That's plan A. Plan B is within walking distance of your school where you can walk them off your campus. For Butler, that was at the church next door. And then plan C is they go to the evacuation spot next door, and buses pick them up and take them to a third off-site evacuation away. That's like when you've got a gas leak or something and it's not safe to be anywhere around. But you got to know it's no good to develop that plan and keep it a secret, and then you don't know which plan you're using. And so when the shooting happened at Butler, we had some kids on at the church. Some of them got picked up by a bus. Some of them were on campus. They were just scattered everywhere. It was just
Some of them went across Independence, which is
yeah.
a major 4-lane road, to a shopping mall, a strip mall.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They were everywhere.
They were just, their plan was everybody run. I don't mean to make light of it because a young man lost his life, but that was their plan. Everybody run. They were finding kids all over the eastern part of the county. It was just unbelievable. And so the communication piece is very important. I like LaFaith's response in that she tied it back to the book, the literature in the book. Again, we stand on the shoulders of giants in our business. Hatcha's book on school law is great. It tells us there's a reason why we do this stuff. We don't just make these plans up in isolation. And she drew the literature connections, and I like that. Um,
If I can jump in, I also wanted to say I'd made a note about LaFaith, and you had said this too, that she said that plan was thought out year in and year out, and you can't just make a plan and then you think you're done, and you need to constantly review it and see if you need to make any adjustments. And also kind of tied to that, Courtney mentioned debriefing and how
yeah,
important debriefing is, whether it's a practice or it's a real situation, talking about, okay, what worked, what didn't work, where do we need to tighten up? And so those were some really great points, I thought.
yes, and I like Courtney's point when she talked about if the teachers knew the law and knew the legal basis, they'd be more apt to follow the rules and the law. If they could say, "Oh, that's why we do this," and get that feedback loop going. And assess, when you have a fire drill, when you have an emergency drill, assess how'd it go. Get your stopwatch out. Find your choke points in the building. Maybe we need to have this room going out that way rather than going out that way. Have people standing around and assessing how it's going during the time. Um, Also, that 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 knowing the law helps with risk management, especially on things like CPI training and things like that. I mean, again, our job is you're going to get sued, but to keep you from losing those cases. You know, you've got an emergency. Who do you send? Who's on your first response team? Are they CPI trained? Or they do like I used to do, just choke them out? Um, I choked two out on TV. They put me in jail now. I was a hero back then, but I would not be now. Somewhere in the archives of WSOC Channel 9 in Charlotte is an interview with me with Kim Bratton, the 6 o'clock anchor, and they interviewed me like I was a hero because I choked two out during the big riot. We don't do that anymore. Trust me, we do not do that anymore. And again, that's the legal basis behind this. Tamika said they were meeting the standards, and LaFace did as well, said that her school was well prepared. And so we do read these things. And again, if your school is not well prepared, I would try to engage in a conversation. I wouldn't be trying to tell them their business, but if you're in that building, your safety is involved in the safety of the kids. If they're not well planned and prepared, if they're not practicing their drills, if they're not doing what they need to do, don't think it won't happen to you. Do not think that it won't happen to you. I've had a fire in a building. I've had
Mhm.
an active shooter on campus just in my career. I've had most of these things to happen at one time or another. It will happen to you at some point. You better be prepared.
And I
Dr.
thought
Lamb.
Diamond also made a really good point about, again, the drills. You've
Yeah.
got to practice. You are legally required to have a fire drill once a month, at least if you're in a traditional public school. I'm still trying to figure out the charter school thing. So Tamika, you're my help there because I believe you're in a charter school, right?
Yes,
We go,
we'll have
we-
our first one tomorrow.
we do too, but I want to see if there's any beyond that. But
Mhm.
your drills and practicing and people and in the communication, people need to know how they need to respond. And the more you practice and you have that muscle memory, the better apt you are for the children and the teachers to know how to respond in a situation. So I thought that was a great point as well. Just trying to, it's, you can't just stay alert and ready every second, but you need to practice to try to help keep your readiness level at ramped up so that you can respond.
May I say something?
Sure.
I I know my first school was in, I like to call it the country, but in Duplin County,
Mhm.
which is
The
near
woods.
in the
That is the
woods,
country. I grew up in
in the
Johnston County,
country.
so I can say that.
I call it the country. But I noticed that our training for active shooter was completely different there than what's done here in Wake County
Yeah.
and Durham. There in Duplin County, they brought in the SBI, they brought in the county sheriffs, they brought in the town cops. We sat in the library. Students, children of teachers could not be there that afternoon. They had to leave. They talked all about Columbine and all the school shootings. They showed us videos. I mean, it was intense. And then after that, they sent us in classrooms. They had the sheriffs and all the people walk through the halls and shoot, get down, get down. And, for a new teacher that's not used to it, it's a little bit traumatizing. But when I came here and all we did was looked at some words on paper and not, really went through that type of drill, I was just like, oh, okay, well, okay. And I just noticed the difference from the country and a larger
Mm-hmm.
city. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting because I feel like at my current school, we had a little bit more of the active shooter training than what I had in Charlotte Mecklenburg. I mean, we've had it a few times in Charlotte Mecklenburg, but it still wasn't quite the same. And we had the sheriff's department out at our school. But it sounds like yours was even more intense, but that's probably a good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was like they really, the SBI really went through They really talked about the Columbine shooting. Then after Sandy Hook happened, I mean, they talked about all of the major ones, and it's to see the pictures and all the aftermath. It's a little bit traumatizing.
It's traumatic.
Mhm.
Diamond, you got
Uh,
something?
yeah, so my view is was kind of different um because yes, my plans, I'm at a different school this year. So yes, the plans are written out because the district, they're all guided by the district. So I'm
Right.
at Northeast this year in Guilford County, but Benell Smith, we have the same
McLeansville.
we had the same plans as Smith did.
Yeah.
And so I'm interested to see how. And so in my discussion board, I kind of spoke on both in a sense because I was that teacher that didn't know what was going on. And the parents, so when I put in there about the transparency, they parents would ask us, well, what happened today? Or whatever. And I didn't know until getting into this program that there were certain things we could say and certain things that we could not when it came to those procedures and whatnot. Um, Smith, we had a gunman on campus in 2018. Came to shoot a teacher, like, and
Mm-hmm.
had a whole list, a whole plan. Like, so I
Yep.
lived through that lockdown with the, so I'm just interested to see how we are because now, like, I am in a rural school now, and I'm wondering if when we'll be doing our drills probably the rest of this week and coming up, to actually see how they take it into
Yeah.
account. So my view was on paper it sounds good. I'm gonna just be real. It sounds great of what we're supposed to do, but I haven't done it yet with them. So my action was more based off of what I've experienced being a teacher for 12 years,
Yeah.
and at an inner city, school. But
Yeah. When you were at Smith, was Donovan there, Hoskins?
that was my man. Yes, yeah.
I trained him when he was assistant principal at Vance High School.
Okay, yeah. He left right before COVID. That
Yeah,
November
went back
before
to
COVID.
Charlotte.
Yeah, but he was only there like 2 years, and now he's an SSO up here.
Yeah,
So yeah.
yeah, yeah. But no, we were teaching classes for Gardner Webb at the annex at Smith when we had an incident over there. And that was like in 2015 or 16, maybe 14, 15,
Mhm.
16. We had a gun incident there and they started locking that building up
It was a
at
recurring thing.
Smith Academy.
I started there in 2015, and I literally just got to Northeast this year, and it was a recurring thing. Like, I
Yeah.
can't tell you how many weapons I've taken
Yep.
from kids. Like that school it's not on the news, but it's a lot that goes on.
It's exactly right. And to the point that Tamika was making, it seems to me like we that it should be the other way around. The country schools should be a little more relaxed and the urban ones should be more in it because that's where all the stuff happens.
But
Um,
but in the smaller counties, everybody knows everybody.
yep.
Everybody feels comfortable letting people just walk through. I'm coming to see my mom. I'm coming to see my aunt.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Well, and when we talk about the inventory, and we can kind of transition into that, is, I see all these schools with all this security at the front, and then the side doors propped open where the kids can go back and forth to the gym or the ball field. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to try to get through that impregnable front door. I'm just going to walk around the side and just walk right in. And so there was a new middle school built in just south of Siler City. And I was asked to come and do an assessment of it. Been several years ago. And it was kind of their front driveway. They were like a mile from 421, the interstate, and but the driveway that came by the front of the school and kind of made a backwards P and came back out. And once you got past the front of the main building, boy, they had every security measure known to man. And there was the playground right there. Didn't even have a fence with all the kids. I'm not after the building, I'm after the kids. And that's what my report back to them was is you've done a great job. Nobody's going to steal your building. However, your kids are at risk. I I am I am right-handed. But I could learn to shoot an AR left-handed. It's not, I could load it and do everything right. So the idea is if I drove in and drove past the front, I'd be shooting across the passenger seat and catch all my brass in the back seat. Wouldn't even have to worry about leaving any traces. I could have went in and I told him I could have killed until I melted the barrel on my gun. I could have shot 30 round clips until I couldn't shot any more. And within 2 minutes, I'd been on the interstate and across the state line, and you'd have never caught me. There was 400 kids out on the playground, no fence, 10 feet away from the driveway, but the building was secure, but the kids weren't. And that's the kind of stuff that happens out in the country. Unfortunately, we know everybody, and we don't think about. We're trying to keep the kids safe, not just secure the building. But the biggest problem that you have when you do an inventory is people propping doors open and
Yes.
just letting just walk around the side. The worst in the world is what happened at the one in
Uvalde,
what
they had the one in Texas, they had propped the door open.
that's where Uvalde.
Yeah,
I was trying to remember
Uvalde.
the name.
Hmm.
Well, it's hot in Texas. It's hot in Charlotte. And so what does the cafeteria staff always do? They prop the back door open, turn a fan on. Everybody knows that. That in hot weather, I'll guarantee you, we can go to a school and we'll find the back door of the kitchen propped open, or more than one. And that's what they did at Uvalde. They had all the security at the front, security personnel. The front of the school was guarded like it was Fort Knox, and the back door was propped open by the cafeteria staff, and they just walked right in. And then what was even worse, they had been turning in on the twice monthly report that the doorknob was broken on that classroom, but nobody bothered to fix it. It wasn't going anywhere for anybody to take action. And they walked down the hall and they tried doors until they found one that put the door open because the doorknob was broken, and went in and killed every kid in that room. 26 kids. That's real. They walked through a back door propped open on the kitchen and went down the hall until they found one of the rooms that wasn't locked because the lock had been broken. And they'd been writing it up every 2 weeks that the lock was broken, but nobody bothered to fix it. And so that leads me to your assessment inventory. My Uvalde story always takes me to that. You don't just do the inventory and write this stuff up. It's your responsibility to get it fixed. If you have to go to the hardware store and buy a doorknob, what if maintenance is not going to come out and fix it, you're still responsible for that. You can't just write it up, file it, turn it in, and then next month it's the same way. It's exactly what happened at Uvalde. Well, the cafeteria ladies had been told not to prop the door open, but it was hot. Well, it's always hot in the kitchen and in Texas. That's not going to change. But that's exactly what happened there. So let's take a look at our assessment inventory that you've got to do every 2 weeks. I mean, bus loading, if you let cars get into your bus lot, you're in trouble. Or if you have kids that have to walk through traffic, what happens? They pull in the driveway and it's all backed up, and so parents start letting their kids out back in the line because they're in a hurry, and the kids start walking through the cars. That's a liability issue. Parents get in a hurry, they dive into the bus lot and drop their kids off in the bus lot rather than getting in the car line. And I've told you the story before. I mean, the problem is everybody in the world has to drive their kids to school now. When did that become a thing? And we don't, most elementary schools are not set up for that kind of traffic. But you've got to separate the vehicular traffic from the buses and the pedestrian traffic from vehicles. That's the biggie. You got to find a way. Get DOT out, get somebody out. If you've got problems with kids walking through cars or walking through buses or cars in the bus lot, you got to figure out a way to get that stopped. That's a loser in court. I'll just tell you right now. That's a loser in court. And since 1992, again, there's tort liability, which means you get sued along with the district for your personal wealth. And you can't just say, well, I told somebody, but the district didn't fix it. You are responsible. You can delegate the authority, but not the responsibility. If you've got these issues with your bus traffic, you need to get them fixed. You know, I tell people, the joke that it's not a joke to the ladies in the neighborhood where I live at Lake Norman, but I don't understand. I don't know why in the world that it's against, that parents feel like it's against the law for their children to ride a school bus. Why does everybody have to bring and drop off and pick up their children? You know, I tell them nice ladies at Lake Norman, if your kids don't ride the school bus, how else you expect them to learn about sex? Otherwise, you're going to have a lot of uncomfortable conversations with kids as parents. Let them ride the school bus so they can teach you. They don't appreciate that, but it's a humorous thing to say, or somewhat. But the whole idea is most elementary schools, especially, are not designed for vehicular traffic. But when you become principal there, it's been that way since the building was open. But let a kid get run over, and then see how it goes for you. And so I would be calling, writing, emailing anybody that I could if I had a situation where I had pedestrian traffic in vehicles or I had cars and buses. I would see what I could do to get that fixed. So that's a big one. Um, Signs, cameras, doors are kept closed at all times. At all times. This notion, well, we propped the I was doing assessment inventory in a building in Charlotte one time because they were on the state watch list for persistently dangerous, and I was trying to get them ready for their state audit. And they had a battery like out of a car, which is dangerous, could explode. They were using it as a doorstop to prop the door open to the ball field. And I'm like, could you done anything that would have been a bigger violation? They had a car battery using it as a doorstop. That will not go. But again, propping those doors open is a real safety risk, especially in urban areas where you just get people wandering in and off the street. You're not supposed to dog down or chain down doors. Um, you've got a way to supervise. You got your, you you need to move all of your business things out of the front office area so that they don't get distracted. And when somebody rings the bell, they just buzz them in without looking. No deliveries, no first aid, no discipline, no nothing in the front office. That needs to be your reception area. And the people that are manning that need to be paying attention when somebody rings the buzzer at the front and not just ring it back and let them in no matter who it is. Um, Control points. Um, we got cell phones now. Every classroom door needs to be locked, even when they're not occupied. Boiler room doors, chemicals, lockers, if you're still in an old building that's got them, hazardous material, first aid kits, fire evacuation plans, a visitor process in the front. All that stuff needs to be taken care of. So here's the things that you need to do twice a month. You need to make sure that all this stuff is being taken care of. And so that's to be used if your district doesn't have one. But again, in a practical sense, and I'll stop my share, in a practical sense, just writing it up and never fixing it is what caused what happened in Uvalde. The cafeteria ladies, they'd written it up every month. They were propping the door open. Well, and the door was broken on that classroom, but nothing ever happened. And we have the tragedy of Uvalde that happened behind that. So this is real. Um, And so you need to make sure that you're doing that. So that's our assessment inventory. I wanted Dr. Maraglia to. We talked about OMA Task 2 last week. How you just copy and paste your Task 1, 2, and 3, including your action plan from the APTEL, your professional growth plan for your teachers. Um, this week I want to talk about Task 3, and my part in that I wanted to say is again to remind you we are assessing the master scheduling process. Are we following that rationale? And then look at the existing one and do a modification based on best practices. So let's look at those things, and then I'll let Dr. Maraglia. Let me remind you, this is the scheduling rationale. This is the way you should build. Should be the process of building a master schedule. Let me pull that up. Are we are we scheduling our exceptional children's programs, our federal programs first? Title One, English as second language, academically gifted, career and technical. Are we doing that first to make sure that we're accommodating those? And then are we following state law on class limits, highly qualified teachers, teacher certification and licensure, making sure we have the appropriate hours, days, and minutes of instruction, the appropriate amount of planning time, duty-free time, and workday and teacher work days? Are those all accounted for? At the local level, are we making sure that we have enough time? You know, I was at Hickory Grove and it was June 10th that year, and they were in a tizzy because the assistant principals went off contract on June 15th, and they'd gotten a notice. They already had their master schedule for the fall built, and they got a notice that the school board was changing the length of instruction for reading from 90 minutes to 120 because they were doing, what was it, reading 180 or what, or
Oh, oh my
anyway,
goodness.
they were
The one
adopting that new,
with the chat with, I cannot think of
yeah,
that.
with that they were adopting that new reading program. Um, I read something or another or something read anyway, but they had to change their daily schedule to accommodate 120 minutes rather than 90 minutes, and they only had 5 days to do it. That's what I'm talking about. Are you making sure that you have all the local things in your schedule, that they're not afterthoughts, that they're built in? And then, are you using your EVOS data as to who teaches what? I mean, we can do the master schedule of, what classes we're going to offer and what time during the day and those things. But more importantly is when we do that little yellow sticky that goes on that chalked off whiteboard, that gridded off whiteboard that's hid somewhere in your building that principals claim that they don't have, but they really do. When they're doing that, putting the stickies on the board, whose name goes on that sticky? Well, EVOS tells you that. Are you doing that? And then, of course, the last is teacher input. And so the notion here is your school following this rationale when they are building the master schedule? So you are to assess not only the master schedule itself and something that could be fixed in it, but also are they using the right process? Dr. Maraglia, your thoughts on task three?
Well, when you're talking about the process, and I think that our discussion board was a great practice for you in terms of assessing, because you do want to look and see, you've got this rationale and you've got to assess the strengths and weaknesses of your process. The first thing you want to look at is your process. And then once you have kind of determined what you feel is following that rationale, what is not following that rationale, then you're going to look at the schedule itself. So you're looking at the process, determining that, then you're going to look at the master schedule, and you're going to then look and see, is there from what I've learned from task one and task two, are there ways that we can take the current master schedule, rebuild it or make some tweaks so that you are better aligned with that rationale and that you are also better serving your students? Because that's what it's about. Are you able to tweak it to better meet the objectives of your school improvement plan? That's what you're really looking at, because it's not about Miss Smith has taught honors for the last 15 years, and we've got to make sure that she still gets honors. Maybe EVOS says she needs to do something else. But you've got to look at what is serving our students and their academic needs. That is what should be the driving force behind your master schedule. Following that rationale and making decisions that are going to help you meet the goals of that plan. Just like as Dr. Lamb has said last week and this week, when you're talking about looking at your budgeting, you're not talking about the paperwork aspect of it. You're looking at, are we making budgetary decisions that are going to help fund our initiatives to meet our goals? Same thing. Are we scheduling our days that they are going to help us meet our goals? And then once you make a determination of that, then you can create that schedule that you feel better meets the rationale, follows the process, and is going to help meet your students' needs. So that's
Absolutely.
what you're doing with your OMA, especially in task 3.
Yeah. Now, I always have somebody ask me, but Dale, why aren't you trying to grow your teachers where they're all great for all students? We are, but we're usually not there. I mean, that's the whole point of task 2 is to come up with a professional growth plan, because rarely do you inherit or hire the best people. I mean, your job is to make them the best people, and in the interim time. Catch this point now. This is the important part of this. While we're waiting to get these and growing these people to where they need to be, we better be reading our data and saying, yeah, eventually that person may be great at this, but right now this person gets better. That doesn't mean that they're going to teach this forever, but right now this person's better at this than this one, and it doesn't matter. I hired a beginning teacher, and she was the best beginning teacher I ever hired. And at mid-year in the high school, I told her, "You're going to start teaching AP European." And she said, "But I've just got." I said, "It's not about time, or it's about talent." The person that I've got teaching it's never had a student to pass the AP exam. Let me say that again. He'd been teaching AP European for 6 years, had 12 groups come through on a semester basis, and had yet to have a kid pass. And the kids were intelligent kids. He wasn't teaching the curricula. And well, he couldn't teach to start with. But the second part is he wasn't even covering the content. To call him a teacher was an insult to the profession. And so again, it doesn't matter that he's been teaching this forever and he'll be mad if he don't. Well, then he can just be mad. But your job is to make a good number go up or a bad number go down. Don't ever forget that about this business. This is a numbers-based business. If you don't make things happen, they'll let somebody else try pretty quickly. We have a report card that I mean, our business is out in public how we did. And again, proficiency on the report card is about the kids you get. Growth's about what you do with them. And that's all we can do is try to grow kids. Some teachers get better growth than others. Those better be the ones that you put in your strategic places. If you'll remember, Dr. Hamilton always talked about that is, if I've got extra resources or a teacher, I'm going to put them strategically where they have the most impact on the report card. I'm going to put my best teachers in those impact areas. That's just being strategic and intentional. That's not cheating. All right. So you should be, again, it should take you 20 minutes to do task 2. You should be moving on, finishing up task 1 and moving on to task 2. And then that takes you 20 minutes and moving on to task 3. So that covers our evidence for the evening, the OMA. All right. So let's now talk about, let me see. Okay. All right. Before we get to state law, and I'm only gonna do North Carolina Title 59. If we got anybody from South Carolina, I've got Title 59. They can read it. I'm gonna do North Carolina law. But before we get there, I'm gonna tell you, in my opinion, what I think are the biggest hot spots for principals in terms of the law. So let me share my screen. Dale's top 10. All right. So here's where you get in the most legal trouble and the most job trouble. All right. Everybody understands No Child Left Behind, which was an extension of 1966 Elementary and School Act, and it was updated a couple times. The version that came out in 2001 was called No Child Left Behind, but it was not a new law. It was a update to the Elementary and Secondary School Act. All right, but it said something new. It said you didn't kids we couldn't have low performing schools, but more importantly for our purposes this semester it said we couldn't have persistently dangerous schools. Now on the discipline night we'll get into this more, but there are 16 acts of crime and violence. 9 of those are acts of violence. The state counts those. You can't have more than 1 per 200 students in your building. If you do, you go on the persistently dangerous watch list. If you can't get yourself off, reduce your violent incidents, and pass a state audit, you lose your job as principal, and they bring in a new team. It's even harsher than the low performing standard. If you have violent incidents occur, and this is the thing that school administrators don't know, they're just worried about their state report card. You better be worried about those violent incidents: assault with injury, assault with weapon, death, kidnapping, rape, robbery with weapon, sexual assault, sexual offense, and indecent liberties with a minor. If you have those things happen on your campus, and if they happen at the rate of more than 1 per 200 students per year, you're going to be in trouble. And you got 1 year to get it fixed. And if not, you're out. You got to know that those incidents. Now, that we'll talk the night we talk about discipline, we'll talk about underreporting. You get caught with these things happening and underreporting them. I said earlier I had problems at Butler High School. Everybody had to go home there, all the way down to the data manager. I cleaned the whole crowd out, principal, all the assistant principals, even down to the data manager, because they were running a conspiracy of underreporting these kinds of incidents, and it became public knowledge, unfortunately for them. And boy, and we got sued and had to pay out a bunch of money, and it got really ugly. They had a system of underreporting going on. They had a lot of bad things happening on their campus, and they had a system of how to underreport it so they wouldn't get in trouble on reporting persistently dangerous activities. I mean, they were in a conspiracy to do that. When things like that happen, boy, does it cost you a lot of money as a school district. And so you got to understand this. We're going to go over it more at that time. You have to put all of your incidents in Power School now will be Infinite Campus. You have to know the difference on what has to be reported to law enforcement. If you don't report reportable incidents, if you don't call your SRO, or you radio them, or call if you don't have one, and you get caught not doing that, that's an automatic dismissal right there. You have a weapon on campus and you don't tell anybody and you don't call the police, you're out. You better understand that the things that the law says that it has to be reported to law enforcement, there is no warning on that. That's a dismissible offense. All right, and then
And I
some other
think
things.
along with that, I mean, what seems to be such a hot topic now as well would be Title IX.
Yeah,
You hear a lot about that these days, and people losing their jobs because they haven't reported, they haven't handled appropriately, on and on and on.
yeah. This one right here. That's number 7 on the list. That's exactly what she's talking about. That abuse, neglect, harassment, that Title IX stuff, that's Title IX right there, folks. That's what she's talking about. I mean, we're not just talking about you didn't call the police when you had a gun. If you have any of that, if it's gender or based or ethnic, if you have any of that kind of stuff, that Title IX stuff, and you don't report it, you'll lose your job over that as well. That's exactly right. I have moved prayer up to number 3 because a lot of school boards and a lot of folks in this Let's Go Back movement, and I was alive during some of them times they want to go back to, and it wasn't no picnic, especially for people of color, but that's another story. But we have this big notion of how we want to go back in time and things were better. They weren't, number one, but the law is still the law on some of this stuff. You got to be careful about it. And so I use that one as just metaphor. We haven't changed some of the laws that are on the book. And just like that lady up in Kentucky that wouldn't do the marriage license for the gay couple, they were all you go get them girl until she got sued and lost, and then they all everybody that was boosting her up, they weren't where to be found when she lost everything she had. So you got to understand, even though in your community they might like it and boost you up for doing some of this stuff, when you get sued, you'll lose. Our job is when we get sued is to win. So that I use that one as an example. Student dress code and publications can be regulated to avoid disruption. Some of this stuff that we're seeing people come into school with now, you need to keep the disruption out of your building. You're responsible to do that. You got to be careful. Search and seizure. You need to understand the difference between reasonable suspicion, which school staff can search a person, and probable cause the police have to have for them to search. Strip searches are illegal no matter what you do, but search and seizure is a big one. I wouldn't search anybody without the police there watching me, because if you find something, you need to be able to turn it over to them. That's a big one. Zero tolerance policies are not legal. If you do this, I'm going to do that, and you don't get any due process. We're going to talk about due process this semester. You don't get to tell your side of the story, present witnesses, question the evidence. Zero tolerance. Zero tolerance means if you fight, I'm going to put you out for 10 days. Well, I didn't get any due process. I didn't get to tell my side of the story. You've got to make sure that you understand that we have to give everybody due process since 1969. Abuse, neglect, that's what we're talking about. Title IX's got to be reported. Family, FERPA. Now, in North Carolina, we have the new Parents' Bill of Rights, which extends FERPA rights to every child in your building now. Let me say that again. The new Parents' Bill of Rights. People say, "Well, I don't know. What does it say?" Well, it says everybody gets FERPA. That you have to be careful with their records, and you can't release things. And it talks about the privacy that families get. So you need to understand that due process, making sure that you understand the difference between substantive and procedural. Substance is what does the law say that students get in a due process when they've been charged with something, and then procedural is did you do it? Um, and so that's a biggie. Well, the handbook says we're going to do X, Y, and Z, but did we do X, Y, and Z? And that's where it comes back to the administrators at the local building level is that although the handbook said that the kids get this, they didn't give them that. Johnny, this is the third time you've been in my office this week. I'm tired of seeing you. I'm just going to punish you. I don't want to hear what you got to say. You cannot do that. You must make sure whatever your process is in your district according to your code of conduct, but that's what you fulfill. The code of conduct is the substance of due process. This is what we're going to do. Procedural is what you do when you process discipline when you have them in your office. You got to know the difference and make sure that you're following whatever rules that your district have. And then finally, arbitrary and capricious. Those are our legal standards for this semester. Arbitrary is me and Raquel are out back behind the gym smoking, and Courtney catches us. She's the assistant principal. She comes out there and she catches me and Raquel smoking out in the back. All right. She sends Raquel back to class and she just turns and shoots me, graveyard dead, bang. Well, the first part of the law that she broke was arbitrary. She punished me and not him. The second part is capricious. That's the second standard. Did you give more punishment than the handbook or the law allowed? While smoking's a bad thing, I don't think in the handbook it said you can shoot Dale for smoking. That seems a little excessive on the punishment side. So one of the things that you have to make sure that you understand is that you don't punish one kid and not the other, and that when you punish a kid, you go exactly by what the handbook says that you can do. In your first court case, in your first case study this semester, it's an example of way too much punishment for the crime, zero tolerance. It's about everything bad, and it's a grading one, which is the first law that you have to go to. So that leads me to what are the laws that you have to follow as a school principal? Well, there are 545 separate school laws under 115C in the state statutes in North Carolina. 288 specifically speaks to principals' behavior and what your responsibilities are. So let's look at that. All right. All right. This is North Carolina General Statutes 115C. All the education statutes are 115C. 288 is duties and powers of the principal. All right. To grade and classify pupils. All right. That's your first responsibility. Decide what grade they're in. Do they pass or fail? Grade and classify, standardized test scores. So, as you will find out in your first case study, Does the teacher assign the final grade in a class of students? No, they do not. Who ultimately decides what grade a kid makes in a class or a course in public school? That would be the principal. It is your legal duty. Now, some folks get thrown off in that first case study and they say, well, the principal consulted with the superintendent and he didn't tell him what to do. Can the superintendent tell you what to grade or classify the student? Absolutely not. And the superintendent won't do that because they know the law. That's up to you. So that's the first one. To make accurate reports to the superintendent and the local board. All right, that's your monthly PMR, principal's monthly report on attendance, and your school activity report. What kids are in what classes with what teachers. If you manipulate those, say for example, you got 35 kids in one room and you've only got 25 in the other, but you put in your report that you got 30 in both, so you'll be under the limit, that would be fraud. You'll get fired over that. It has to be accurate reports to the superintendent and the board. And right here is all the things that go along with that: timesheets, payroll, all the stuff that's due every month. To improve instruction and community, the principal shall give suggestions to teachers for the improvement of instruction. That's why you have to learn to build that school-wide professional growth plan. That is what that is. To conduct fire drills and inspect for fire hazards. We know that you have to do a fire drill once a month. What does it say you have to do? At least twice a month during the regular season. Include cafeterias, gymnasiums. Why do I have boiler rooms on the inventory? Storage rooms, stage areas. Well, the purpose of keeping buildings safe from another fire. To file 2 copies of a written report. Now, this last one was what I was talking about. You file the report, but you don't follow up to make sure that the back door is not propped open or that the broken door handle on the classroom is not done. Who's it say is responsible? It's the duty of the principal. You can't claim maintenance didn't come and do the doorknob. Well, I put it on the report. Not maintenance is according to the law. What does it say right there? It's your responsibility. If they're not coming and fixing the door, I'd be on somebody's doorstep. Or I'd be at the hardware store getting me a doorknob, one or the other, or both. To discipline students and assign duties to teachers with regard to discipline, well-being, and medical care. Again, to discipline students, you have a duty and a responsibility to do due process and to do it without being arbitrary or capricious, to make sure that procedurally you are following the substance of the due process law, to protect school property, to report certain acts to law enforcement and the superintendent. Now, if you've got some disturbance going on at your building, some parents angry or something, that one falls under make reports to the superintendent. If you've got a violation of the law, it falls under this one. You noticed in the language, who comes first, law enforcement or the superintendent? That would be law enforcement. Now, when I was in that position and people used to call me, the first thing I would ask them is, did you call the police yet? And if they said no, what did I say to them? I'm hanging up now. You call the police. I don't want it to look like that we engaged in some kind of a cover up or a conspiracy. You call the police first. Call you radio, you SRO, do whatever you have to do to get you call them first because the law is very clear. Certain acts to law enforcement first and then the superintendent. If a violation of law has happened, especially if it's a weapon or drugs, those have to be reported. Now, there's a lot more that has to be reported, and we're going to cover that on discipline night. But the important part to remember is when something happens, a law has been broken on your campus, you inform the police first, not somebody at the central office, the superintendent or their designee. I need for you to understand this too. You have to report what happens at your building, grounds, athletic field, school property, bus, Bus stop too, by the way. Bus stop is covered in this. If it happens, then you got to count it. Now, one of the things that happens on underreporting is, and this happened at Martin Middle School, is anything that happened on the bus, they just called it bus misbehavior. Well, what if a rape happened on the bus and that's what they had to happen? That's a rape. That's not bus misbehavior just because it happened on the bus. We go with We don't report outcomes, we report incidents, and we have to put the location down. But because something happened on the bus doesn't mean that it's always bus misbehavior. If we had a fight on the bus, we report a fight. If we had a weapon on the bus, then they had a weapon on school property. You have to understand the law here, and it's very clear here what has to be done. To make available school budgets and school improvement plans. I can't tell you the number of times in this class I've had students come back and said, my principal said we don't release the budget. Yes, you do. It's state law that anybody comes and asks for it, you and that the school improvement plan, you have to give it to them. Right here it is in the law. I didn't make that up. To evaluate licensed employees and develop mandatory improvement plan. It goes back to that professional growth plan that we talked about. You're required to do that so that you can do improvement of instruction. Transfer student records, sign driving eligibility forms, obtain necessary written consent, parents, DMV, to establish school improvement teams. That's state law that you have to do a student improvement team and has to do a school improvement plan every year. Right there it is. We don't just do it for fun. It is a legal requirement. So this is the context of being a school principal. These are the laws that speak that you are the person responsible for all this stuff. There's other things that we'll talk about, finances like fundraising. You can delegate that activity to the PTA, but you can't delegate the responsibility. But these are the things that you're responsible for. And if you don't do these things in the order that they're supposed to be done, the way they're supposed to be done, these are all, lose your job deals here. To summarize for the evening, our goal is to not lose our house. I mean, that's the whole point of school law is that they can't hit us with a tort where they can take our property. That we've done what we need to do to keep to keep ourselves and our families safe because it's a very litigious society, and if you don't follow the rules, they will use that against you. Dr. Maraglia, take us home here. Final comments for the evening.
Well, I was going to save this for the end of the semester, but I think it's appropriate for tonight. If there is one thing that I always remember in working with Dr. Lamb all these years, and I feel like it has served me well, is you need to always remember that hope is not a plan. Hope is not a plan. You can't just hope things are going to turn out for the best. You need to have a plan. And you need to make sure your plan falls within the legal barriers that are out there.
Couldn't have said it better myself. We always
Well, I
appreciate y'all
learned from the
being
best, so
here.
there you go.
I don't know. Have him or her show up to class next week so I can learn something too. Every year there's a legal symposium at McKinnon Center in Raleigh. I'll be there in a couple of weeks. When you get your big job in the central office or a principal job, I would highly recommend it. Law changes from year to year, time to time. That's the one thing that you cannot be behind the times on is school law. It is the most important thing in terms of protecting yourself, your career, your family, your home. This is the personal side of it. And so um, I hope that down the road that you will be getting involved with that. As always, I'm always surprised when students show back up the next week after having sat through us, but we try to stay on time. And I'm appreciative of the work that you've done. It was really good this week again. Applause to Raquel, our star of the week. We'll have a star every week. We keep up. You notice we read your stuff. We will read your stuff, and we will feed back on it instantly. This is about how to do this job. This is the most important class you'll have about how to do this job and how to keep yourself safe and long term in this. And we take it very seriously. Thank you for joining us tonight. I appreciate you all being here. We will see you next week.
Yep.
All right. Everybody have a good week. Thank you.
Good night.
All right. Great job.
I have a quick question.
All right.
I can wait till
Well,
I'm in